Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Friday, August 22nd, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today we check in with the redistricting fight and how it's extending to California, plus a major penalty handed to Trump in his New York civil fraud case gets tossed, and one Mendez brother is denied parole. The GOP is on the verge of a big win in Texas, but the redistricting fight is just beginning nationwide. I spoke with USA Today chief political correspondent Philip M. Bailey for more. Philip, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Taylor, what's going on?
So where do things stand with Republican redistricting right now? I guess it makes the most sense to start with Texas.
Right. I mean, that's where the launch pad of this started in the Lone Star State. Now that we saw what the Democrats in Texas did by holding out and going to different states to draw attention, now they're back in Texas. And as predicted, Governor Abbott called another immediate special session. So that partisan battle has now escalated there to where Texas Republicans passed a new congressional map that essentially carves out 5 additional seats for Republicans in Congress. This is all at the behest of President Donald Trump, who is seeking to really keep at bay voters who more than likely, and this usually happens with presidents, where they lose control of Congress in the midterm elections. So already telegraphing it, President Trump announced that he believes that the Republicans, because he won Texas, are entitled to more seats. That map is now headed to Governor Greg Abbott's desk, where it'll likely be signed. And now the question is shifting of where does this sort of redistricting war shift to next? Indiana is certainly on the list for Republicans, Ohio. There are a number of other states I think that could pop up as well. And Democrats ready to return fire. So this redistricting war, I think, is one of the more headline features of Trump 2.0. I think the redistricting fight is certainly going to be right up there with immigration and the National Guard.
Well, Philip, you say Democrats are ready to return fire. I know the ball is already rolling in California, and you have a new piece about Governor Gavin Newsom and his approach there. What are we seeing in California?
Governor Gavin Newsom, who is certainly considered a 2028 presidential hopeful, he's really thrown it out there. I mean, he's really leaned into sort of being the liberal brawler for Democrats. He's even taking up Donald Trump's all caps social media rant style, being very antagonistic to Fox News hosts and Trump supporters like Kid Rock. I think he, in fact, tweeted out in all caps, "I hate Kid Rock," very much in the same way that Donald Trump did to Taylor Swift. And egging conservatives on in this way, it's sort of remarkable to watch conservative pundits and commentators say how unbecoming it is for the governor of California to do this. And Newsom's point is that, exactly. If it's unbecoming for me as the governor of California to do it, why is it okay for the president of the United States to do it? But Newsom, I think, has really caught fire here, Taylor. He's launched into this fight, leaned heavily into it, and really galvanized the rest of the party around him. Now you see other Democratic governors in New York and Illinois and other states at least considering doing their own sort of mid-decade redistricting plan. You saw President Barack Obama, who is certainly known as a more prudent figure, right? Someone who's very careful in his words and more methodical in his political actions, fully endorse Gavin Newsom's plan to basically do the same thing in California, where he wants to redraw their congressional lines and add potentially 5 Democratic seats. And this is despite the fact that President Obama and other Democrats for years have been saying, we need to get this system out of the hands of politicians. You know, legislators shouldn't be picking their constituents. It should be the other way around. Well, you're really seeing an about face here. And I think it's going to be cascading throughout not just the entire Democratic Party, but those 2028 hopefuls as well.
Well, Philip, in terms of the American people with this conversation writ large, I mean, how do Americans feel about gerrymandering? How is all this going over with the American electorate ahead of next year's midterms?
Well, surprise, surprise, the American public really is not a big fan of politicians picking us rather than us picking them, right? And gerrymandering is something that both parties have engaged in for decades. It's been a nasty business. Anyone who's listening to this, if you look up your state legislative district, your congressional district even, they look like scorpions and Rorschach tests more than very contiguous or very contained districts here. And that's been a tactic used by both parties for a number of decades. A new poll by Reuters earlier this month did find that, look, most Americans think this is bad for democracy. Now, Democrats are more likely to say that than Republicans. And shout out to Erin Mansfield for her piece distilling all of this. But it's interesting here is that even though the American public has its opinion, and you talk to a lot of small d democracy reformers who do not like this race to the bottom, there is, again, I think some shifting political winds here. Well, in California, about 57% of California voters, according to one of Newsom's internal polls that was released, they support redrawing those maps, including, I think, overwhelming number of Democrats. But overall, ahead of this, American voters did not like this idea. But as I think Gavin Newsom might be the new face of it, these new Democrats who want to get just as down and dirty as MAGA, maybe blue MAGA is what they should be called, they don't want to have one hand tied behind their back here. They look, we're not going to play by a different set of rules than Republicans. So Newsom's fight fire with fire, or eye for an eye politics, seems to be gaining some traction with mainstream Democrats.
All right. Philip M. Bailey is USA Today's chief political correspondent. Thank you, sir.
Taylor, as always.
The mammoth $454 million penalty imposed against President Donald Trump in his New York civil fraud case has been thrown out. I spoke with USA Today Justice Department correspondent Aisha Bagchi for the latest. As always, thanks for hopping on, Aisha.
Thanks, Taylor. Happy to be here.
It's been a while as far as this case is concerned. Remind us what's at stake in this New York civil fraud case and what was the initial decision in court?
This was a decision that came down in early 2024. It's a civil case, as you mentioned. That means that money is at stake. Some other types of sanctions are at stake, but there was never a question of anyone going to jail or prison. President Trump was sued. This was before his new presidential term by the New York Attorney General, Letitia James. He and his businesses and some people associated with his businesses, including his two oldest sons, Don Jr. and Eric, were sued. And basically, the Attorney General's office alleged that they had engaged in years of fraud in their business practices, that they were inflating the value of their assets in order to get better loan and insurance terms, and that they had made a lot of money off of this. And a New York trial judge ruled in this case and basically decided that that was true, that the assets had been inflated for a long time, that they had benefited from that in ways that were unfair compared to other businesses, and that they had to pay a massive penalty as a result to give up the money that the judge determined they had gained, which he said was approaching $500 million, just an enormous judgment against these people. And most of that judgment was against Donald Trump himself.
Absolutely huge number. I remember when we discussed this earlier last year. What did this appeals court this week then decide about this penalty Trump and some of his family members were hit with? And Aisha, what did we hear specifically also from members of this multi-judge panel?
This was a 5-judge appellate panel. You really saw multiple opinions coming out of the panel, so it was a complicated decision. But the ultimate takeaway is that the huge financial judgment against Donald Trump is being thrown out. He's not going to have to pay this nearly $500 million penalty. It included interest that kept accruing as this appeal continued. The court did say that he and the Trump organization are still going to face some penalties that aren't really about finances. There were some restrictions that are in place having to do with their ability to do business in New York in the short term. Donald Trump can't apply for loans from New York banks for a few years. He can't be an officer or director of a New York business. Now, of course, he's president, so it's not really a question of probably of whether he was going to be running a New York business in the next few years. But those restrictions are still in place. It was kind of complicated because 2 of the 5 members of this appeals court panel basically said it's true that a lot of fraud took place, but the penalty was just too big. There's a provision of the Constitution that says you can't impose excessive fines on people, and they said that this violated that constitutional provision. You had a couple other judges who wanted to rule differently. They thought that there were enough issues in the record when it came to the initial trial that really a new trial was warranted rather than keeping those restrictions on Donald Trump and just throwing out the financial penalty. But because there wasn't a majority of this 5-judge panel for any particular decision, 2 of the judges decided to back 2 other judges, even though they said they disagreed with their ruling, just to throw out the financial penalty, keep these other restrictions in place, and basically let the New York Attorney General and Donald Trump, if they want, appeal to the highest court in New York.
All right. How did the president and his sons react to this news?
Donald Trump and his sons, huge victory lap for them. This was such an enormous financial penalty. It really was the type of penalty that would have a big burden on a business and a businessman, even for someone as wealthy as Donald Trump. And it was a resounding victory, even though there are still some restrictions in place. So he's thrilled. He called the appeals court brave for the decision that they rendered. And he basically said that he wants to see other legal victories happen after this. He has already had some legal victories in the wake of his presidential win. We saw a couple of his criminal cases crumble in the wake of that election victory. But he still has his New York criminal conviction in place. He's appealing that. He is still appealing $88.3 million in award money that he's supposed to pay to New York writer E. Jean Carroll after two juries determined that he had defamed her and sexually abused her. So he says that he wants those legal decisions to vanish as well. The New York Attorney General, Letitia James, issued a statement also. She said that she didn't want it to get lost, that basically the determinations when it comes to fraud in this case are kind of in place. It was a complicated appeals court decision, but there are some things in the decision that really talk about the idea that Trump may have committed fraud over many years. So she really wanted to highlight that. And she said she's going to appeal. So basically, she says this story isn't over yet.
All right, we will see what comes out of this next. Aisha Bagchi covers the Justice Department for USA Today. Thank you, Aisha.
Thanks, Taylor.
A federal judge ruled yesterday that the Trump administration must halt construction, stop bringing new detainees, and begin winding down operations at the mass detention center in Florida's Big Cypress National Preserve, known as Alligator Alcatraz. U.S. District Judge Kathleen Williams issued a temporary restraining order earlier this month, which put a stop to new construction and any additional infrastructure at the facility for 2 weeks. Late in the evening yesterday, she doubled down on the restraining order, saying the state and federal government should pack everything up at the facility and prepare to shut it down. The ruling stems from a June lawsuit where it was argued that the detainment facility is a clear violation of major federal laws put in place to protect wildernesses. You can read more with a link in today's show notes. Eric Mendez has been denied parole. He and his brother Lyle were convicted of the gruesome and high-profile 1989 murder of their parents, and a California parole board ruled that Eric Mendez, now 54, would remain in prison in San Diego after a nearly 10-hour-long hearing yesterday. California Board of Parole Hearings Commissioner Robert Barton said that he continued to pose an unreasonable risk to public safety. Eric's 57-year-old brother will go before his own parole panel later today. The brothers earlier this year were newly eligible for parole after a long-fought legal victory that led to their resentencing. Originally sentenced to life in prison without the possibility for parole, a judge in May ruled that they be resentenced to 50 years to life for the murders of their wealthy parents, Jose and Kitty Mendez. Youthful offender statutes made them eligible for parole consideration with the new sentence. They were 18 and 21 years old, respectively, at the time of the murders. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. We're produced by Shannon Ray Green and Kelly Monahan, and our executive producer is Laura Beatty. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and as always, you can email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson, and I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.